Well, thanks everyone for joining. I just started throwing together an agenda. You are the first guinea pigs in this process, so it's going to be a little rougher. But if y'all can jump on the doc associated with the invite, feel free to take notes and whatnot. Not just feel free, please do take notes. But I wanted to spend a moment just to sort of level set so we understand what our goals are here and why we're doing this. And then go through the rest of the agenda. So just to sort of see what my expectations are, I want to review the strategy and make sure that we have a good strategy and that it is well articulated for, in this case, value stream management specifically. And this is in some ways kind of prep work for some other strategy and plan reviews that we have. I think we're starting off actually plan review at the section level. So the section that this covers under is dev. So there's a lot more that's going to be involved in that plan review. But since value stream management is one of the 4 key industry categories that we identified back in our 2019 plan, I wanted to spend some time and review the category in a lot more detail and make sure that we have basically a solid plan and strategy and vision for getting a product leading or a market leading, actually not the right phrase, a product leading category out there. And I don't know about the timeline. We originally said within 12 months. I don't know if that's the right timeline now, but the point is we need to have a good strategy for getting there. So first off, I keep using the word plan and strategy and vision. I want to make sure we're all on the same page when we talk about that. Plan is explicitly a 1-year plan. And strategy is, we're defining it as a 3-year construct. I'm not going to call it another plan. It's a little bit ambiguous there. And then, vision is something like a 10-year thing. So what I want to make sure that we've got here is we have a plan, like, roadmap, a month by month, milestone by milestone, or quarter by quarter, sort of this is what we're going to ship when, and that can be a plan. But in order to say whether that's a good plan or not, I feel like it's really important that we understand, okay, but where are we working towards? Where's the longer term? And 3 years is what we've targeted as sort of what we're aiming for there. And I don't want to see then a month by month or even a quarter by quarter out for the next 3 years. I don't want to see a plan. I want to see just what's our, first thing, I'm going to use the word vision here. It's ambiguous, but I want to see what does this look like in 3 years? What does our product look like? What does the customer's use of our product look like? Less so about what the industry and the market looks like. I mean, there's some numbers and things like that, but that's not what this is about. This is more just I want to understand the context to then be able to look at the plan and say, great, given this context, given where we believe where the customer needs to be, where we will be in 3 years, then here's the 1-year plan to get there. So I'm going to spend less time on the plan part, although if we get to it, we'll get to it at the end. But mostly it's about building up this understanding of, what does the world look like in 3 years? What does our product look like in 3 years? Does that make sense? All right, cool. So the next step then is we already have a documented strategy doc, which doesn't quite get into a 1-year plan, but it does identify at least what's next and identifies a bunch of other kinds of competitive landscape, all this kind of stuff. There is a section in there on where we're headed, which I think is pretty much squarely what we're looking at here. Now, if I look at the doc, right, there's the overview, which sort of just defines what VSM is and why it's important, and that's really important for context as well. The where we're headed, I think, is the section that I'm most going to talk about now. And so that's describing, right now it's describing what are the questions that customers need to be able to answer, which is great because what their needs are and fulfilling those things helps me understand the context. What I think is missing from this doc for me is how are we going to help answer those things? And I know you and I, Virginia, we've had tons of conversations about how we're going to do that, but that's what I'd love to see fleshed out, and then also ultimately put back into this document as painting a picture so that anybody, reading this ultimately will have an understanding of like, oh, this is where we're going, both internally and externally. Internally, all the engineers and everybody should know where we're going so that they can actually go ahead and implement the stuff and have things be in line. Everybody internally needs to know this, but certainly prospects and everybody else needs to understand where we're going as well. So it's that painting of a picture of like, how is this all going to fit together? And then having some of that conversation help us make some decisions potentially about different choices. I know you and I have had conversations about specifically, label set versus, event driven. And I think that's a great question we need to answer. It's a technical question, but it has far reaching implications. But that's one of the types of questions I want to address here. Before I move on, actually, I wanted to see who is actually on the call. I'm using my phone because my computer's internet kind of sucks, but I want to make sure that do we have design represented? Is there any designers on the call? Shout out if you're on the call.
Yeah, I'm here. This is Shane.
Okay, great. Perfect.
We're playing great.
Excellent. Thank you. Great. And then we definitely have some engineering representation. We have product. So I think we've at least got sort of full scope covered. I think that's important, just as a subtle thing. Product tends to do these kinds of things in isolation, and it's really important, I think, for the team to be on the same page. I'm going to go off on a tangent for a moment. One of the side effects of doing these kinds of things is not just to come up with really good ideas and everything else, but to make sure that we're all on the same page with those good ideas. So later on, when we talk about various trade-offs, you don't have to sort of bring all the context through again. We've already sort of gotten on the same page once. All right, so the process I'd like to propose then is we spend some time reviewing the existing doc. Hopefully you've all read it, but I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't. If not, you might want to start cramming right now and start reading it. And then I want to spend some time sort of doing this divergent thinking part, thinking about the big ideas, brainstorming, talking about all the things that we could do. And it's really important during this phase to not be too constrained about technical details and implementation details and all this kind of stuff. Like I wanted to be constructive, divergent thinking. I mean, so don't shut people down if they got ideas that are totally infeasible, whatever. Let's spend some time, basically brainstorming. Then spend some time, converging that back down into, okay, so great, we've talked about all this great stuff. What's actually really important out of all this, and why? And then and this is actually very similar for anybody who's gone through the Think Big, Think Small exercises that we do as part of product management recruiting. It's an exercise that I developed actually back at Heroku, where we sort of did this brainstorming, and then we said, okay, great, now what can we do in the next 24 hours or next 72 hours? And there were just some really interesting side effects that I think are really important to highlight for context here. So again, during the brainstorming, it wasn't just that we came up with good ideas. There happened to be the side effect of we got on the same page. People threw out the same ideas. We had an opportunity to understand what those ideas meant. Getting on the same page turned out to be incredibly valuable. During the Think Small, saying like, okay, what are we going to do in the next 24 hours? That had this really great side effect of distilling down like the essence of like what's really, really critical here. Like a lot of times what you discuss as part of the solution actually isn't really important. It's something maybe a competitor does, but it doesn't mean that customers actually need it or whatever it is. But distilling it down like this is what's really, really crucial. That actually turns out to be a really important part of this process. So I hope we have time for that at the end. We've scheduled an hour and a half. It's going to be depending on how this goes, it could be really rushed, could be really smooth. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But that's why I think it's important to decouple these pieces. Divergent thinking, convergent thinking, or think big, think small. They pair up really well. All right. In terms of reviewing the existing documented stuff, so I've read it. Presumably Virginia has. She wrote it. Does anybody? Maybe what we can do is Virginia and I will start talking. If anybody else needs to read it, just skim through it really quickly as you go. But I have some initial thoughts. But also since this is recorded, Virginia, do you want to give maybe your 1 minute summary of where we're headed and how you would describe that today?
Sure. I guess just the where we're headed portion, and maybe I'll give a brief overview as well of what we're planning to do.
Go ahead.
So value stream management, I think, is a concept that's starting to get more and more popular in software engineering. I think previously was considered somehow similar to kind of like the production value stream management side of things, but it's actually completely different because it's not a linear process. It's extremely, you can run a lot of different portions in parallel that can then feed back and kind of change the direction of the different streams. So I think it's important to actually look at it from the different perspective that software engineering has. A couple of things around value stream management. I guess the most important thing is the mapping, which is the ability to map, basically understand where you're adding value in your engineering flow, so that then you can understand what are the most important portions of the value stream, how can you improve them, how do you measure them, and so on. In terms of where we're headed, I guess I can separate value stream management into parts. First is trying to measure the development life cycle and actually getting teams efficient, which is the first portion, and I think it's the most tangible and probably easier to accomplish. And the second portion is how do you link this to business outcomes. And I think obviously because we haven't really started until the last milestone to do much work around value stream management, we're still at the minimal stage. So for me, the minimal stage should be very much focused on measuring the development process and ensuring that we have the right metrics there. And then to make it a very viable solution, we need to be able to actually link to some sort of business metrics, whether it's time, whether it's revenue generation. And there I can go crazy, as you said, we should not have any feasibility constraints and restrictions, but ideally you have a way to link it maybe to Mixpanel or Optimizely or some sort of A/B testing tool where you know how much you get out of certain features in terms of revenue growth by having some sort of quantitative approach that feeds back into our tool. So this is, I guess, in short, and in terms of where we're headed right now, a couple of the main questions that we've, I think, heard over and over and over are how is GitLab helping me become more efficient in my life cycle? How much of my team's work is being spent across the kind of like the four main components, which is feature development, technical debt, security issues, and security issues and bugs. Yes. And how much time do you actually spend on the creative phase versus how much time do we spend on the repetitive phase, which is basically from the moment we decide on a solution until we actually deploy it or have it in production. And I think what's important is that we don't only provide an overview, but rather have an ability for directors of engineering managers, or whoever basically looks at these dashboards to drill down and understand where can they actually improve and what's causing them to slow down, what are the bottlenecks in the process.
Cool. So there's a few things that I don't know if these need to be captured written down, but I think they're really important from my understanding of the evolution of VSM and why we're excited about VSM and stuff like that. We've had cycle time analytics for a while, and that clearly played into our message. I mean, we had it even before we had that as part of our strong message, but the idea that, efficient processes and DevOps in general help you reduce your cycle time, they help you ship faster, and shipping faster translates ultimately into, more business revenue, customer value being delivered faster, learning faster, all these other kinds of things. But the key there is cycle time. And so we had a good measure of cycle time. but there were some serious constraints with it. And let's be honest, nobody's really using it. Like there's some bugs that stop people from using it. But even if it weren't for that, like people weren't really wanting to use it, but complaining about the bugs. Like they just didn't really kind of care. But at the same time, they do care about cycle times. Like we're somehow really, really missing the boat. And a couple of things about VSM that I think were super critical were that the customer determines the map. And VSM actually becomes an ambiguous acronym there because it can be value stream mapping. And mapping is actually an important part of this. And so what I loved about this is when we thought about VSM is to say, well, look, we don't have a cycle time defined just in terms of these rigid things. Like we assume you're going to go to staging and then you're going to go to production. And that's exactly the order. Is like, well, what if I don't do that? What if I ship in a different order? Or what if I have, I don't know, there's lots of different what ifs. But people define their own value stream. Like maybe I've got to have a pricing review of every feature that ships. And like, okay, that's an explicit step. And I want to measure how long that takes. And I want to then measure like what's the impact on my cycle time because of that extra work. And so anyway, so the mapping, being able to be custom, I think was really, really critical. And our current, cycle time analytics doesn't offer that. The other then gets into, the actual analytics of it. And you've touched on a variety of pieces there, but one of the pieces for me was traditional VSM anyway, if there is such a thing, has a concept of sort of queue time and then work time, or I'm not sure exactly how they always determine it. Sorry?
Talk time. It's so just to back up, I think, Mark, the thing about this, I think that's important is that this is a concept that comes from Lean Six Sigma and lean methodologies as far as improving flow and measuring and improving flow in a production environment of where you're doing production manufacturing. And it's been co-opted and applied to software development. I think that background is important because this is where this concept has come from. And value stream mapping is it goes back a long time as far as to how do organizations who are trying to improve their process and improve their efficiency start to understand what is the process that's at play from creating a new product. And I've gone through exercises in the past where actually the problem is mapping the value stream and then being able to measure what it looks like to take a widget from the different stages of that value stream and understanding what activities in the value stream add value and which activities are what would be called non-value added. That's why it's called value stream mapping. And then the exercise then is how do you reduce the non-value added activities? And
right, exactly.
Dusting off my Lean Six Sigma stuff from somewhere. I don't know where it's coming from right now. But I think it's important to draw that distinction because we're applying a new concept here. And it's funny because I just did some Google searches on search terms as to what was common, and value stream mapping is really the most common term that people search for. Value stream management is kind of a new thing. It's not when people hear VSM, they think of the mapping, not the management of the value stream.
So that's a good point. I'm not sure what people do think about. When I think of there's the mapping portion, then there's value stream management, which to me means more about the analytics and the drilling down and the executive reports and stuff like that. But anyway, you touched on several good things that were really important. So one was the sort of the queue time versus work time. Like any given job, there's a certain amount of, especially going back to manufacturing, right? It's literally a part sitting there, a widget sitting there, not being done, no work is being done to it. And then it now goes in, somebody picks it up and consumes it or uses it. But in software engineering, that's absolutely true as well, right? Like ideas are created. We say, great, let's throw this into the sprint, but the engineer doesn't pick up the sprint for a week and a half while they're working on some other sprints, and then they start working on it. And then once they're done, a lot of times it's thrown over to QA, and then at some point it's thrown over to operations, and then it's thrown over somewhere else. And so there's a lot of wait time. So being able to identify wait time versus work time, or queue time versus work time, or lead time versus whatever the phrases are, seems to be an important part of traditional VSM. The other one that you then talked about last was the value stream versus the non-value added activities, and being able to identify, like, here is work that's being done, but work that doesn't directly create value, doesn't move the stream forward. That's an area I've explored less personally, so I don't have a lot of great examples. You could argue that QA is non-value added work, or you could argue it absolutely is because it's improving quality and that's improving value. I don't know, but however you define it, you've got some way of defining this stuff. You've got some activities that are going to be value added, that actually deliver value to the customer. In this case, value is to the customer. But you've also got some non-value added work. And then traditionally, again, with a value stream, value goes left to right, and non-value added activities are sort of top to bottom or whatever. They're in a different direction because they don't move the value forward. But it's still really important to track them, and it's important to understand, like, just because it's non-value added doesn't mean you cut it, doesn't mean you don't do the work. It's still really important to do. You've got compliance things, you've got audit trails, whatever the heck it is, like you've got stuff that you need to do, but it's important to understand, and then to some extent, maybe recognizing that, try to like diminish that as much as possible or sequence it as much as possible differently, whatever. Anyway, I think those are the sort of the classical things that we're aware of. A lot of the stuff that is in the where we're headed section.
Can I derail you for a quick second?
Sure.
Why? Why is this an important topic? I think if we were to back up and ask, why are we talking about this from a customer's perspective, not from a GitLab perspective, but from a customer's perspective, why do customers care about this? And then double click and just do the a why exercise. So what problem, why do they care about this? I think it might lead us somewhere. I don't know.
Great. You want to throw out your first answer?
No, I'm asking. I mean, I can throw it out there. Why? But why? Why is this an important category? Why?
Well, actually, Virginia, go ahead. It's you on the category.
Sure. So I think it's important because without having this visibility, you can have hundreds of people working first on the wrong thing, and second, working very slowly towards the wrong thing, even before you know what's actually the right thing. So then this will slow you down as a company. It might even be your demise. So I think without value stream management and without visibility in terms of what's actually providing value in your value stream, in your stream of activities, in your development lifecycle, it's incredibly difficult for a company to function, and for managers and executives to actually understand where they stand. Oftentimes metrics are things that have nothing to do with reality, and I think it's important to actually provide visibility that's coming straight from the code base and what's actually happening.
The only thing that I want to say there, though, is I would like to decouple those two things, the people working on the wrong thing versus working slowly. And I would put forth that VSM is not directly trying to solve the problem of people working on the wrong thing. That, in fact, I've never seen anything in VSM specifically that is like identify whether you did the right thing. I mean, I know you've tried to bring that in because you then say, oh, let's get that back to business metrics. And of course, if they don't deliver business metrics, that implies that they were working on the wrong thing. But honestly, I think there's a ton of VSM work where that it doesn't tie to the business metrics. It just ties to, this is about efficiency. So I love the ambition of saying, well, no, but let's also make sure they're working on the right thing. But I think I would actually define VSM as not being part of that. And I'm totally willing to be challenged on it.
I'm not sure how you
VSM
clarify.
is about efficiency.
I'm not sure how you clarify, but when I was thinking about it, the way I thought about it was strictly in the fact of, usually what we want to do is we don't want to tell engineers to go work on improving some part of the process that we don't know is causal to the problem that we're trying to solve. So in other words, you want to be in a situation where you have definitive, okay, if I go work on this, like I say, it's build times are slow. If I go work on build times and improve the efficiency, that's going to improve the overall efficiency of the organization, truly be causal to like the primary driver for why we are running slower than we are currently. So from that perspective, that's what I view as the most important part. Now, whether you say that's working on the right thing, from an engineering perspective, that's not a business value proposition, right? So
that's a really funny, interesting interpretation, clearly coming from different sides of it. From a product perspective, the right thing means like the right feature. From an engineering perspective is like, yeah, the right thing that's going to have an impact on my cycle time or something like that. So yeah, we've got to define our terms better there.
So yeah, so are you worried about value stream as in the end product, or are you worrying about value stream as in, are we working as efficiently as possible? Or is it both?
So the value stream management or value stream mapping is about the value delivered to the customer. So at the highest level, we're talking about, did we deliver value to the customer? But all of the analysis is about how efficiently and quickly we delivered that value to the customer.
But why does the customer care about productivity and not working on the right things or the wrong things? Why? Double click into that. Because I think it gets to the fact that they have to go faster because there's competitive forces in the market. They need to accelerate their delivery. Means that they have limited resources. They don't have an infinite number of developers or teams to do the work. It gets into the resource constraints that they're having to make real trade-offs every single day or every single quarter about what are they going to do next in order to impact the business. And as we double click into it, right now, it's as if you're flying a plane. And this is not true about now. This is true going back in time, because you can go back to the days of CMMI, and a core focus was measurement analysis and figuring out how do you measure productivity and how do you measure effectiveness. So this is not a new problem. But for years, software engineers and software leaders have flown blind by the seat of their pants, winging it as to where they think the problem is or where they think the reality is of how do they get better. And now we have the opportunity with what we're talking about to provide people with the instrumentation or the visibility into the work that happens so they can make informed decisions as to where to allocate resources and how to ask people to work on the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is makes a lot of sense, because we cannot necessarily know whether someone is working on the right thing. Maybe the right thing is actually learning fast, so failing fast, and the fact that that the feature that we're developing right now would not work is actually the best thing we could have done. But it's around the opportunity cost of what else we could be doing. So if we provide the visibility to management for that, I think then we solve a big problem, because oftentimes we prioritize in business, we prioritize maybe the wrong thing because we don't have enough information in terms of what constitutes the work or what are the, I guess that's more like on the business side, but like what would be the business.
And the reason I wanted to double click into this is that the why that this matters is this is the insight it gives, somebody, a leader, the insight to make decisions as to how do they improve their team's effectiveness. That's really what we're getting at.
So it definitely is. I'm a little bit leery, though. That's a very grandiose, broad statement. And there's tons of things that affect the team's effectiveness. And I think VSM is going to be one of those tools, but shouldn't be the be all and end all of making sure your team is effective. And I think this gets back to the point, though, of like, are they working on the right things? Again, is engineering optimizing the right aspects of their pipeline? Like, that's a part that value stream analytics should be able to identify. But did you deliver the right feature in the first place? Are you going after the right market? I mean, boy, it'd be really interesting if VSM could solve that, but I think we might get super distracted if we go down that path. Well, because we're not a product management tool that like analyzes market forces and tells you, what the right features are and things like that.
And I would argue that portfolio management is the discipline of trying to make decisions about, am I going to do this or that, and trade-offs around the choices of what projects to do. Whereas VSM is we're turning the crank. How can we turn the crank more effectively and efficiently?
Exactly. I think I would like to propose we define the VSM is exactly that. How quickly do you turn the crank? That is its purpose. It's how efficient is that crank in the first place? Because even if it turns really quickly, but you throw in tons of resources at it to make that's like, how do you do that as quickly and efficiently as possible? That's what VSM is about. Now, if you're aiming your team in the wrong direction, but you're really efficient about it, I totally get that's a problem. And I get that GitLab should solve that problem. I don't know that VSM is the answer to that. I'd like to have VSM be a little more focused.
I like that.
And I think the industry defines it different. Like, I don't think if we go talk to analysts and we talk about, I mean, it might be a nice bonus value add if we start talking about all these things. And especially it's something that GitLab might be able to do that nobody else can do, because not only can we do VSM, but we can also make sure that you're, working on the right things, because we actually do measure business results and not just efficiency. So GitLab will solve that problem, and VSM is going to be an important part of that. But I think VSM is about turning the crank faster.
Which is about having insight into how to help the team, or how to help the team and the process be more efficient.
Exactly. It's identifying inefficiencies. It's measuring it. It's taking a baseline, identifying hotspots, letting you work on how to fix those hotspots, and then validate that in fact you fixed those hotspots and the result was that we moved faster. Like that's what it's about.
All right, I'm off my soapbox.
So
Right, cool.
let's
Derailment done.
Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate the contributions. So let's write that down then. So Mark's proposal, VSM is all about turning the crank faster, because while it may be a worthwhile goal to measure value of like actual activities, that could also fall in portfolio management, which I think is like, that's a great point, John, that portfolio management should be the panacea for someone managing a whole portfolio of things and trade-offs to make. But
I just want to really quickly there, the portfolio management to me still doesn't even feel like that covers it, because portfolio management is mostly just about, once I've decided, how do I just, manage this process, but like deciding which portfolio, maybe it is, I don't know how the industry defines it, but somewhere there should be, but it's not VSM. I just want to say that.
I think it is. So I think like when we go through our vision for portfolio management, like that has to be a part of it, because how else do you help organizations make trade-offs amongst the portfolio?
Well, but again, it depends on what the industry sort of defines as portfolio management. But I could see people saying that it's just about the efficiency of which I manage my portfolios, as opposed to the effectiveness, efficiency versus effectiveness.
I think you would definitely hear people say that, but I think like we should strive
for more. That's fine too.
Exactly. Yeah. And maybe that comes in the form of, I don't know, things that are built into the to the application.
Right. And just for the record too, sorry to cut you off there. For the record too, I'm also fine with saying like, well, VSM can aim for more too. Like, yeah, we take your industry defined definition of VSM and we up the ante and be like, how could you possibly do VSM unless you also, make sure you're working on the right things? And boy, look at GitLab is perfectly suited to do this, because we measure maybe we have to throw in Meltano to make it work completely. But for the next 3 years, I think efficiency is the key.
I'm very happy about this decision.
All right.
I think it also gives us a baseline, right? There's the hypothesis, like let's work through it. And if we start to disprove it, or we start to see that, look, Virginia's got a whole list of really nice questions that value stream management answers in the vision. And as we think through as we scope the vision to, it is just for turning the SDLC crank faster. It is, target persona is engineering managers, product managers, directors of engineering. I think like we should challenge ourselves with those questions. I personally always thought that VSM would be taking like the persona approach. I think that I always thought that VSM would give us like that killer thing in Ultimate that like an exec would want to look at on a day-to-day basis. And it sounds like we're drifting away from that a little bit, which is okay, because we've asked ourselves a few whys. We only got in the second level why. I don't know if we need to go third or fourth or fifth. And it's sounding like we want to target more the engineering manager. So I think that's fine as a stake in the ground, and like let's just see where it takes us.
I would say also director of engineering is actually the more perfect persona, because you would argue that engineering managers should know what their guys are working on, unless they have like 20 people teams, which is not meant to happen. But directors of engineering, they actually don't really know what everyone is working on. They cannot compare between teams. They don't know how much technical that one team is working on versus another. Is that what's making them slower and stuff like that? So I think for me, the perfect persona is the director of engineering. But obviously you go through the engineering manager in order to know what's actually useful, because ultimately they report to them.
I would also say understanding what their team is working on could be very broad or very specific, right? Because I know what my team is working on, for example, but I can't tell you how long it's taking to get through review process or through implementation planning or things like that. And something like VSM, at least how it's defined currently, would help me identify those areas without having to go into the minutia of every single issue and analyze from what time to what time are these things moving between workflow phases, for example.
Yeah, I would say that that's even more important in our company, right? Because we're working all from distance. So if you were sitting next to the engineers, everyone is chatting, so you kind of know what's happening. But especially in global teams, as for example, Dennis was saying, we know that for GitLab review times are a killer, and which is why we started basically from trying to understand what specific portion of the life cycle of an MR is actually taking a very long time, and we know that it's going to be the review stage.
Okay, so Mark, you talked about I don't know who wrote the getting a baseline term hotspots, help figure out how to tackle hotspots. So then there would be, if we scope it down to here, then there would be, hey, you've got the right set of activities defined, and like let's help facilitate like quicker handoff or quicker execution of those activities. And then there would also be the problem of like you've got the whole a whole bunch of activities defined that are not adding value or are kind of outside of the engineering lifecycle, right? So you mentioned pricing. Like pricing would be a really good one of these. There's a pricing review that maybe takes 3 months because finance has like some sort of weird backlog that they don't work out of GitLab. They're working out of, I don't know, some sort of old issue tracker. Are you saying that would also be a part of this as well? Or are we strictly going after engineering? What are your thoughts?
To answer that, I want to go off on a different tangent for a moment and then come back to that.
Okay.
I think one of the other really interesting benefits of VSM over cycle time analytics was sort of the scope of end to end. Like when we used to do, cycle time analytics came from when we were talking about idea to production. So we literally thought about, okay, idea, I come up with an idea, we bounce it around, we get it to planning, it's assigned a milestone, then we do some work, and then it goes through, the cycle, various steps, and it gets to production, and production was the end, right? And so you measure your cycle time as getting to production. But there's all sorts of things that go on past that point. Things don't stop at production. It's one of the reasons we have the DevOps lifecycle goes beyond now. But let's start simplistically. Okay, so yes, technically it's in production, but the feature flag is still set to 0. So great, now let's roll that feature flag out to internal users. Now let's roll it out to our beta users. Now let's roll it out to 10% of everybody else, and then eventually to 100%. So there's some process that's post-production. But why does it stop there? Okay, great, so we've rolled it out to 100% of the people. Have we done the release blog post about it? Do we have a marketing page around it? Have we started the ad campaign around it? Have we done, there's a ton of marketing that happens afterwards. I'm honestly not sure how most companies will define their value stream, but I can imagine an awesome evolution of the value stream map that goes way beyond production. Not even just way beyond delivery of feature, what about also just, okay, yes, we've delivered it out to, the feature flag is 100% on. Have we measured that we've achieved success of that feature? We've got some metric we're watching, and we wanted to, feature adoption needs to be at 10% to consider it a success. Well, how long do we take? Do we give it a week? We're running Optimizely or whatever it is. Or even, again, however you're doing it, we don't run Optimizely, we just ship it, but we have some success metric. When does it hit success metric? Is there a sequence of success metrics that has to go through? There's all sorts of things that potentially could happen afterwards. I don't know if marketing is going to get involved. I think it would be really interesting if they did. And certainly in that case, then this is not just about engineering. And I love that we have the potential at least to get beyond just engineering. But if we focus on what customers are asking for, nobody's asking for the marketing stuff yet. People just want, literally our customers at the customer advisory board, they're just like, I just want to be able to prove that my DevOps transformation is effective. I want to show that my cycle time got shorter. Now they don't even, I don't even know if they know what their cycle time definition is, but
They don't.
I think right. But that's the thing. They don't even have a definition to know, like, to be able to answer that question. But for the most part, it's like time to production, right? There's that
So
great book Accelerate that just came out, and it's like, here's the 4 dashboards you need, and it's, they called it lead time, but it's basically the time to production. Like, that's the thing that you want to measure. So if we can solve time to production, if we can measure that and make it more efficient and help people shorten it, we will dominate this category. VSM, we will win the VSM space. If we also go past that and be like, oh, let's also do marketing and other things, it's all bonus territory.
yeah, I think a few thoughts. One, I really like the idea of like attaching to some sort of tagline. And you just mentioned like time to production. If we said nothing on our VSM vision page except for VSM is all about making your time to production faster, I think that one, it just makes it very, very clear, and also probably provides a good framework for the decisions and prioritization decisions that Virginia's gonna have to make over the next year.
Yeah.
So one, I actually really like it. I'm not trying to be more expansive or to kind of throw a wrench into that, because in general, like you're kind of the guy that like wants to boil the whole ocean, and I'm always the one trying to like make you bring it back in. So it's funny to be on opposite sides of this right now. But the other thing is those kind of marketing activities that you were mentioning after production. That's what I was trying to get at and suss out a little bit, because a lot of the activities can actually happen on the left side of production. And so we may want to figure out how those types of activities that are not engineering led activities, but do prevent the rollout to production, actually play in here, because there's a lot of companies out there. I think just going back to pricing is a great example here, because you have to typically get like a finance approval. You have to typically get like product manager approval, maybe a GM approval on something like pricing. Maybe it's stuck in like legal review, which has nothing to do with the actual development or engineering of a feature or specific code. So there's all sorts of things here that I think are interesting, that have nothing to do with engineering, but also are on the left side of production. So before something can get there.
So I'll just add one more thing, just my personal thoughts on this in terms of priorities, at least. I'm personally still struggling with the idea of like, there's the left to right value generation, and then there's the top to bottom non-value activities, the pricing and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how people actually do that in practice. I don't know how we would do it. I don't have a vision or an idea really even of how we would truly solve for that, other than, sort of as an extrapolation of any sort of task, like, okay, you can keep track of the fact that this task happened, but we can't make any comment on whether pricing was valuable. Like, yeah, the pricing conversation took 3 months. You can't ship it without it. You still need to have it. But being able to identify that the conversation happened is really critical, and being able to identify that it's a non-value generating activity that causes a huge delay, that's super important. But I don't know what the drill down would look like there. I think like we would stop at a certain point. But on the other parts, on the engineering, the drill down can be a lot more interesting. Like, we could give you advice for how to make your reviews more efficient. We could give you advice for how to streamline your deployment. We can give you best practices for the engineering portion, but the analysis may stop on the other stuff.
Okay, so then do you care about production then, or do you care about time to merge requests merged or merge ready then?
Well, I think you care about that as a subset for sure, but like production, I think is the goal, right? At least to production. Whether we want to go beyond production is one thing. And with feature flags, I would also argue it's not to production. Production isn't just a binary, it was deployed, but to 100% rollout in production would be the defined thing.
Right, but if it takes Dennis's team, 2 weeks to do something, right? All of the kind of I up to just shy of P idea, all the way up to right before that thing goes to production, and 2 weeks it's fine. He's gotten all of his reviews done. The code looks good. Virginia's done some feature assurance testing. Looks fantastic. And this is not our organization, but there are many organizations like this. They go and now they're going to go, and the product manager is going to have to go have a pricing discussion with finance. It's going to sit there for, let's just say, a month. So you've got this, the value stream before it can get to a customer is now 6 weeks. only 2 of that is impacted by Dennis's team. 4 of it's impacted by a pricing team. Wouldn't you, as like a product manager or some leader in the business, want to know like, hey, I don't know if it's worth like going and like, you know, turning the crank on Dennis's team to make him more efficient if that thing's just going to sit for 4 weeks in pricing review before it gets there.
Yeah, I think flip side of it is like it's still worthwhile doing that as well, especially in that particular example, because not everything has to go through pricing review.
No
so
doubt,
like,
no doubt,
you know, all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it's really important to identify, again, the total system, the total map, if you want, this value stream. Let's get back to the terminology. And if pricing is a thing that caused a huge delay, clearly we should know about that.
Yeah, you have to.
You have to be able to identify it. I'm just saying that from an analysis perspective, we may not be able to go much farther, but I think we have to be able to put it in there.
But in the, you know, thinking about the theory of constraints, if you go to the Phoenix Project and or Gold Rat's The Goal, if that pricing step takes 3 weeks, you can make Dennis's activity 2 days, but it's still going to take 3 weeks. And unless you fix that constraint and address that constraint, you're stuck. And the whole point of value stream mapping and management from end to end is to be able to see where that red spot is, where that constraint is, and then you spend your management time and attention on that.
So the way I'm envisioning this would be sort of level 1 or step 1, iteration 1 would be, we wouldn't actually have any of these orthogonal things. We would just simply say, you know, merge request is available and merge request merged. And wow, that took 4 weeks. And we're not going to know how that took 4 weeks. We're just going to know it took 4 weeks. And somebody will have to look into that. Now, it may turn out that, in fact, like the review took 1 week, but we didn't start the review until the pricing was approved. And that pricing approved took 3 weeks. But the first level might be that it's just lumped into, like, we don't have an event tracking when pricing was approved. Like if I think about it literally as like an issue level or a merge request level, there's a checkbox in the merge request, you know, description, and somebody clicks the checkbox. And at some level, I'd love to dive in and be able to measure like exactly when each checkbox was checked. But because it's just free-form markdown, yeah, we just don't have that analysis. Level 1, all we know is merge request was created, merge request was merged. How long did it take? It took forever. And maybe it's even like, wow, like here's this variance where like 10% of the issues took forever. Well, why did those 10% take forever? You dig in and you're gonna have to do some manual effort. So we're gonna identify the hotspot, but we're gonna not, oops, I just want to do that.
There,
just turn off my video. Okay, sorry. So anyway, the first level would simply be like, let's look at the events we have. But I do think in our 3-year vision, we have to have some answer for, can we capture these orthogonal things? Can we identify that in that 4 weeks that it took from MR created to MR merged, or MR finished and ready for review before merged, that 3 weeks of that was spent, you know, waiting for a checkbox to check. That'd be awesome. In fact, that will help drive some of the direction, because that means we need to be able to track those events. We need to have an understanding of checklists. We need to, you know, have like, you know, some concept of what it means. And there's an event when I click that box, like that has to be a first-class citizen probably, or some kind of a, you know, an event structure.
But shouldn't pricing,
I think that's important.
Yeah, and shouldn't pricing actually, if we are talking about like real life situations, I guess unless you're GitLab, probably pricing will happen anyways before you push the feature to production. So this whole time from request, from a merge request being merged until production will, if it's huge, we'll probably highlight. And for example, from the creation of an MR to approval is only 2 weeks. If the other part is huge, it's obviously going to highlight that there is something else going on. So I think we can capture, but I kind of agree with you. And this is how I've been working on, is that the minimum and the viable portion is just give me transparency over what's happening, how am I making my decisions, so that I can get faster, even if I'm working on the wrong thing. Maybe if our category is to be lovable, this is when we start going into, okay, we drill down and now there is a business portion that is actually slowing down the process. How do we bring some of this data in, and so on and so on and so on. So that's how I'm thinking about it.
So let's just wrap this up. Whether the specific item happens during issue time, because that's I think what you're getting at, John, or in the MR, it's something that's tracked in our system. And so we'll hopefully be able to surface it. I'm just suggesting that it's totally okay to start with something at a high level, and then at some level we might need to have some sub thing, like there's various approvals and various other kind of gates that might be part of that process. And I think it's actually really critical to be able to do that. And I think that flexibility is super important. That's the kind of thing like I might have as a state, like waiting for pricing approval. And I want to maybe like literally drag the card from one column to the other. Maybe there's no automatic event that I can actually track that says that I'm willing to do that, or waiting to do that. But because I drag the card, that's what it is. I mean, I've defined my process, and my process has a go get pricing approval. And again, it can happen at the issue level before the MR actually even starts, or maybe it is when the MR is going on. I don't know. I want to be prescriptive about how a company works. That's part of the whole point. We need this flexible thing, which is my cycle time stuff I think wasn't sufficient. But I think we can wrap it up and just say, I would argue MVP, sure, just focus on the left to right. That's the top priority. But top to bottom, the waste time, all those other things, I think they're absolutely on the table to be able to part of VSM, part of our solution for VSM.
Cool. I think that makes sense. I think that's directionally the path that Virginia and I were going down. Mark, do you have any reaction to the following statement, which is, what if for the next 1 year, VSM, all the work that Virginia's doing, focused just at the engineering level and really focused on the things that we know we can measure really well inside of GitLab. So ideas, issue creation, all the way to production, hopefully deployment, but really focused around the merge request, the commit, the issue, and labels, and just nailing that over the next year, just nailing that for engineers.
I think that absolutely makes sense. And in particular, I think maybe you even define a smaller goal there of just like, can I keep going back to this Accelerate book? Like, people are doing DevOps transformations. They want proof that their DevOps transformation was valuable. And they want to understand how valuable and how effective, and they want to know the I of the ROI, the R of the ROI. And I think if we can help them understand that, especially if GitLab is part of their solution and part of their transformation, they want the ROI of GitLab itself. But even aside from that, just simply, they want to know, did doing all this work prove valuable? And I think that would be an amazing first year goal.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that question. I want to make sure we write that down. Is leaders care is my DevOps. Did you use the word valuable, or is it working, or how did you phrase it? My DevOps transformation is working.
Working.
Yeah, working.
But so I have a question. The way I've been treating the other two categories that fall under our team is basically as very much related to value stream management. So code analytics, the way I've been thinking about it, is information that actually enables engineering to get even further information around productivity. So, for example, identifying code hotspots, or when engineers are committing basically the same, supposedly files that should be unrelated at the same time. So basically, not the right separation of single-purpose coding and so on. But the reason why I've been looking at these is because these matter when we actually look at how long have we taken to create a feature. Because maybe we think it's a new feature, but actually 70% of that feature is refactoring old code. Another engineer is working on parallel because we are now refactoring, and this is a real case scenario that we've been through with Dennis. Another team is refactoring the filtering component, and another team is refactoring, for example, the date picker. So teams are working in parallel. We have to slow down because we're kind of constrained by them. So the way I've been looking at code analytics is basically anything that will help us go deeper into value stream management bottlenecks. But then my question is also in terms of Devops Core. I always imagine Devops Core to be more what Accelerate should actually turn into, because this is kind of what to me the meaning of DevOps Core is. And so do you think that we should actually just fold these two categories into value stream management and define value stream management better?
For the sake of this discussion, can we define DevOps Core, please?
That's my question. My question is, should DevOps Core be defined as basically one number that we, or like one categorical kind of score?
Let me back up. In the past, we had a metric or a thing called DevOps Score, which is really how much of GitLab are you using, because we want you to use lots of GitLab.
I think this was called conf dev index, which is why I particularly am calling it.
But I want to draw a very bright line and distinction from the GitLab, the metric GitLab cares about, which is you using lots of GitLab, versus something that we would call DevOps Score, which might be about how efficient or how effective or how fast are you going, or something that helps people go faster. Because I don't think there's very many customers out there who really care about how much of GitLab am I using.
I agree.
And so that was a self-centered, GitLab-centered thing that I think actually makes us look trivial, because we're not really focused on what they care about. I want to make sure I want to make sure we know what we're talking about as we're clear.
So
I want to be talking about the customer-centric one.
So I would make a proposal opposite of what you've asked for, Virginia. Is I've made some comments there, but I'll read them out really quickly. Just I think of code analytics as part of the drill down, and VSM to me is about identifying a hotspot and not then necessarily drilling down into the hotspot. If as a standalone VSM tool, there's probably no way for them to drill down anyway. Like just about measuring your value stream. And I totally get that in order to problem solve, you need to drill down. But I think that's where our value is as a platform, as a DevOps platform, is we have all this great stuff. Like if it turns out that one of your hotspots is in code review, then great. Here's a bunch of tools that we can help you do that. But that's code analytics. That is a different category. If one of your hotspots is in planning and everything else, then we've got a different set of planning tools and project management tools and portfolio management tools. If one of your hotspots is on deployments, well, then maybe we've got some Kubernetes something that will help you out. I think as a platform, we need to offer the drill down. In some ways, VSM is at such a high level that like almost all of our product is under VSM, because like all the pieces of it. So I don't want to just throw code analytics in it because they happen to be part of the same team and the same stage. I think of code analytics as separate. And actually, one of the comments I was going to make is that in the where we are headed section of your document, I think you're already conflating those two. You're already putting in things that I don't think are part of VSM, but there are things that VSM might highlight you to that then you need to use code analytics to figure out. So like just really run through quickly, like our engineers working on a particular part of the code base, having to do a lot of refactoring, which slows feature flow down. I think that's a great question, but that's not a VSM question. That might be something that you, like as a hypothesis of your VSM analysis, that some features are really slow or there's a high variance in feature development, and you dig in and you're like, well, why are some features taking a long time? You might then want to use code analytics to figure out why some features took a long time or why parts of the code base are slow or something like that. I wouldn't put that as a VSM feature or goal.
I think that makes sense. Obviously, it will not look like separate features, or it shouldn't look like separate features to our
right.
customers.
It's a flow. I shouldn't say it's a separate feature. It shouldn't be a separate flow. It should be easy. Like I should be able to easily click down
totally.
at VSM. If there's a graph that I can go to, then I go to the code analytics page, but it's a separate feature, but it's one flow. I'm totally fine with it being a flow.
Mm-hmm. And what about DevOps Score?
So DevOps Score, I think, is another interesting thing. I think of that as a flip side. First off, you need to figure out what it is you're defining this as, because yes, like the last time I was part of this conversation, conv dev index was just going to be renamed DevOps Score. But now it sounds like you're trying to define it as something else and create something else. And the way I'm looking at it would be, I want cycle time analytics. I want cycle time measured through VSM, not through our current cycle time analytics. But given a VSM, I want to be able to measure my time to production and be able to, help people get their time to production as quickly as possible. Devops Score, as previously defined, was basically saying like, how much of GitLab have you adopted? There should be a correlation between, hey, if you adopt tons of GitLab, that helps you reduce your time to production. And if we have both of those tools, we should be able to, in fact, graph over the tons of people who give us their data, like, oh, here's the cycle time that you've got, and here's the correlation. And yeah, the more you adopt. So to some extent, while yes, John, it sounds self-serving to say you've adopted more of our product and that only benefits us. The assumption.
Let's call it GitLab score or GitLab adoption score or something that's accurate rather than misleading.
Sure. Well, maybe let's go down that. But the point, though, is that as you adopt more of these things, you get more efficient. And if we believe that, then we want to encourage you to adopt these best practices and raise your score and see how you fare versus the competition and versus your industry and all this kind of stuff. Now, if that's not true, then clearly we should just pack up and go home or something. But like if people adopt more of GitLab, or more objectively, if they do more DevOps, if it's truly a DevOps score. I know part of the problem, though, is they could be doing DevOps outside of GitLab and therefore have a low score, but still be great as a company. And that's clearly something we should try to figure out. Totally orthogonal. I really want to push that off. It's a different part of the conversation. And then explicitly, though, what I want to say, though, to your question, Virginia, is no, that's not part of VSM. It's related to VSM, but solve it separately. It is different goals. Yeah.
Okay, but then separate. my opinion is that mean time to detection, mean time to like restoring service, deployment frequency, and so on. This to me should all be not part of VSM. This should actually be part of Devops Core and whatever is used to actually compare people. And maybe cycle time is another, and
right.
In Accelerate is basically another metric that goes into Devops Core.
So that's a really great question. All I can say right now is that I'm pretty sold on the idea that we have a dashboard with those 4 metrics. I think they resound really, really well. Whether you want to call them Devops Score and totally co-opt that, whether you want to make it something different, I have no idea. For the purpose of this conversation, it's not relevant. It's not part of VSM, I agree with. One of them is part of VSM, right? But your mean time to resolution is not part of VSM. But I could totally still see some DevOps dashboard, not DevOps score, totally different thing, but a DevOps dashboard that has these 4 metrics on it. And if your team wants to own that dashboard, great. If you need to make a new category for that, great, have that conversation. I'm not yet convinced that that's DevOps score. And I'm not convinced at all that what we meant by DevOps score is that. Like, you're just talking about 2 totally different things and you're actually confusing things by using the same word. And I think they're completely unrelated concepts. And so I wouldn't co-opt the term DevOps score. It's just a DevOps dashboard. And then if that means we need to call that other thing something else to be less ambiguous, then so be it. But separate conversation, let's decide. For now, the point is it's not VSM.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
All right. So we've got 25 minutes left. I feel like this has actually been really valuable. Hopefully you have as well. But I don't still have a sense for like, what does the product look like in 3 years? I feel like we've now narrowed some scope. So I feel like we know some of what it's not. We know a little bit about what it is, right? So in 1 year, is my engineering team, actually is even a hard phrase. It's what is the cycle time and what's the trend over time? Like, that's some of the goals that we're looking at. But there's nothing about like, is my cycle time good? We don't have any comparisons. That's an interesting option. But, and I don't know in a year if we'll be able to identify hotspots. Like, again, if your reviews take a week, is that good? Is that bad? If you improve something, or if you see that your reviews are taking longer and longer, that implies it's a hotspot because it's a degradation. And so if you look at the year trend and you see that your code reviews are taking longer, then probably I need to look at that. but there's nothing inherently in VSM at this level that's going to tell you whether that's good or bad.
It's
That's
relative.
where actually the DevOps.
It's relative.
Well, relative to what,
to your value stream. Whatever that longest thread is, whatever that biggest problem is in your value stream, is going to be where your hotspot is that you need to go look at and fix.
But what I'm getting at though is like, if my reviews take 5 minutes, but they could take 1, how do I know? Like 5 minutes sounds good, but it could be 100% automated most of the time. Like, I don't know if it's hot. What does a hot spot mean? Hot is, yes, it's relative, but relative to what?
It's relative to your
to your
entire
whole
value.
process. Yeah.
So
So
if
if
I
you're
No, but that's,
It
I don't-
is.
well, okay, that's a question. Is it? You're making a statement, that's fine, but
I
are
think
you
so, yeah.
only saying
Based
that the
on,
most important thing is it's as a percentage? If I'm looking at my value stream and it's 100%, hotspot means the largest percentage stage. Is that the definition of a hotspot?
yes, I think when I've spoken to customers, this is what they find is basically bottleneck. What is preventing me from getting faster? They don't care if something that takes 5 minutes can take 1 minute. They care about the portion that is taking the 3 days out of the 4.
Right. So in general, I totally understand that. But for example, like planning might take 3 months, and for whatever reason, and then reviews take a week. Does that mean the only thing you should focus on is planning because that's a 3-month process? What if reviews can also take a day? Like, shouldn't we also cut that down? Like, I don't know that simplistically defining a hotspot as the thing that takes the longest, because it's also relative to what your potential is. Like, if it takes 3 months, but it's always going to take 3 months because that's just like, there's a minimum, like we have a notice period to the government and it always takes 3 months and we've squeezed it out as much as we possibly can, then that's not a hotspot anymore. That problem has been solved as much as it is. The next hotspot then, like, what's our potential? So to me, I think there's 2 factors. One is, average overall, right? But the other is, what's my potential? If I can take my 3 months and get it down to 1 day, that's a massive potential. But if I can only get my 3 months down to 3 months minus 1 day, like, that's nothing. But if I can get my 1 week down to 1 day, well, that still shaves off a week. That's important.
So we
Well, I
need some
think-
sort of list or prioritized actions for our customers long term, right? Where to dive in and where not to, and these can be like dumb recommendations to start with, and I think they should get smarter, maybe based on machine learning over time, and even based off of like massive data sets that we get from self-managed data and off of .com, right? So they should be able to understand how they're comparing against other GitLab users. I don't know if we could extend that to the industry based off other tools, most likely not.
We could, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, so imagine, taking a page off of the Devops Score or the Dev Index Score. If I've got a value stream, and if I could somehow map that value stream to everybody else's value stream, if we use the same terms, which frankly may fail, but if we can say, look, hey, for your industry, by the way, most merge requests only take a day to review. Yours are taking 7 days. Wouldn't that be cool if that was a thing? But maybe we can't do that, and maybe that's an evolution and certainly not in the 1-year plan, but I think it should be certainly part of the plan. Like, that's something that we can do pretty uniquely and say, we'll give you advice, give you recommendations.
Yeah, I like it.
But beyond that, okay, the simplest thing, simply, like, okay, this thing's taking 3 months, this thing's taking a week. Take a look at the 3-month thing first. Like, that's clearly what's taking a huge chunk of your time, and figure out what you can do. The reason that this is important too, like a really great example of this, is planning time versus development time. Like, planning could take 3 months, if you want to call it that, before something gets picked up by engineering. But then once it's picked up by engineering, how quickly do you turn the crank? And there's a really totally valuable way to look at this, or valid way to look at this, of like, I only care about the time it takes from decision to implementation, but not from idea to implementation. Because idea to decision, like, yeah, but we waited for the industry to determine that this was important. We waited for the customers to thumbs up it. Like, that's a valid wait. That's a functional wait, in fact. Like, it's not waste. It's a valuable wait. But once you decide to pick it up, Sorry.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Actually, Accelerate separates the process exactly in these two parts, and they obviously this is going to be insulting to engineering, but they kind of define the creative part as the one portion, and the non-creative part, which is actually creative, as the one that people should try to systematically actually bring down to a specific time, because it's something that should be repeatable, while the creative part is different every single time.
Now, I will throw out though, and this is pretty critical too, of course, if you follow lean startup or any of that kind of stuff, right? Learning is the most important objective, and your total cycle time matters. If some idea sits in a whiteboard for 3 months before engineering picks it up, and then sure, you're incredibly fast, we delivered a week later, like your cycle time, your total cycle time is still 3 months plus a week. And that means that the industry has moved on, your customers may have moved on, like lots of things have changed. I mean, 3 months even sounds bad, but let's say it's 2 years, right? Some idea sits in the backlog for 2 years, and then eventually when you pick it up, we're really fast and we delivered it within a week. Fine, but your market data that created that is 2 years old. So total cycle time does matter. But I think the book is still right to say, well, yeah, but frankly, just don't focus on that. As an engineering team, focus on this part. Focus on the once you've decided to pick it up to then deliver it. Let the product managers and everybody else deal with that other problem, and they should. And I think VSM should help them figure out how to make their overall processes faster. But as a priority, it's time from like determining when to do it to and maybe actually I'm going to elaborate a little bit, because there's even like picking it up versus shipping is a certain time window, but then there's deciding to do it versus shipping it, which is another time window, because there could be like, well, my sprint backlog is filled for the next 6 months, so product says to do this, but it just takes 6 months of waiting. That's still actually valuable to know as well. But that's separate from, I think, the creative part of, yeah, we haven't even decided to do it yet. I feel like we're not capturing this in our doc.
Yeah, we should write that down. So, hold on. I want to make sure that recommendations means like not what we're recommending out of the output of this meeting, but as a feature.
Oh, right. Got it. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I think.
So anyway, so in the 3-year vision, we got 15 minutes. Let's get back to the 3-year vision, right? Because I think you can pare this down to what are we going to do in the next year. And this is important, frankly. It's all part of the process, determining what's important. God, there's a helicopter flying above me. I don't know if you can hear that. It's pretty loud here. But like, what does the 3-year vision look like? And yeah, being able to give recommendations, being able to go beyond just engineering, going into like, how can you make sure that the approval processes, the ideation process is as fast as possible? How can you respond to customer things? Like imagine, like GitHub had an announcement the other day, and we want to react quickly to it. If it takes us 6 months of planning before we decide to react to it, it doesn't matter that the engineering is incredibly fast once we get there. Like we just wasted 6 months. Like being able to react, that is actually a serious driver to business value and pays dividends in terms of revenue and everything else. So like being able to react to something, total cycle time matters. 3-year vision, absolutely, I think we need to be looking at total cycle time. 1 year, focus on engineering, totally down with that.
And I guess we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to go through what we will be, I guess it's not going to make 12.2, but 12.3, the customizable psychoanalytics at the group level, and what you thought about it and how it actually fits with the product, because I think it's also important to discuss, but we haven't actually had the time, and we have like 14 minutes.
Right. I think that's just a separate conversation.
Okay.
Right. So the goal of this is to flesh out a great 3-year picture of what psychoanalytics looks like. And then maybe as a consequence, a 1-year picture. Okay, but this is where we're starting on. And then you can come up with the 1-year plan for how you're actually going to deliver on that one. Yeah. And just, again, it's really important to understand the context. I'm already seeing, you're making some trade-offs. You're talking with customers and be like, oh, well, we can't use labels for this. We have to do this. We have to do events. It's like, yeah, but you can't make
But we're
those
using
decisions
both.
well, I know, fine. But that's the conversation, right? That's the debate about what one works. We just need to make sure that we understand the context. We understand where we're going. So we're not backing ourselves down in a corner, not prematurely optimizing. Don't implement features now for, that aren't going to be value driven for 3 years, right? But you need to understand the context. So here's where we're going. So this is why we're doing it in this way. But here's the 1 year plan, and then now you can get down to here's the 3-month roadmap, and then understand that context a little bit better.
Is it fair that the 1 year plan would focus on the MR, the 3 year strategy would focus on issues?
I would say we can focus. Well, we're already starting to focus on everything. I think it depends on how fast we ship, but I think it's important to actually have the connection between issues and MRs, because otherwise you kind of lose track of what's going on, because we have sometimes 10 different MRs that actually relate to one particular issue. And we are incentivized to break them down further. And as part of one of the recommendations that we want to give to customers as well is to try to reduce the size of their merge requests, because this obviously decreases review time in most organizations. So to me, it's important to actually keep the connection.
Okay.
From the beginning.
I was throwing that out there from a scoping perspective of trying to see if there's a distinction.
I think it's on the drill down, maybe.
It does.
I tend to agree with you, though. I don't think you can separate the two.
I can, but I think on the drill down, I definitely am planning to focus first on the source code management part, because this is what most customers use us for. So this is where we kind of have the biggest impact in terms of drilling down. And obviously with the customizable psychoanalytics that we're planning to ship for 12.3, it can be used only for engineering, right? So they can actually just decide on the stages that relate only to them. So they can decide to only look at MRs if they want to. But I think the drill down, I will be focusing first there, and then probably on the other stages. So more on the planning and stuff like that.
All right. So is there, because we've only got 10 minutes, and one option is for us to flesh out the 3-year strategy a little bit more. I added a little bit already to this line 14A, but I feel like it's woefully sort of inadequate, but maybe the conversation has been enough to jog. And recommendations, thank you. Here's a complete picture. Here's where it's going to be. And that's what I'd love to see documented. Is in 3 years, here's the problems we're going to solve. We're going to solve all of your cycle time. We're going to solve, your overall, your creative parts and your engineering parts and your marketing parts and everything else. We're going to solve not just your value added parts, but your non-value added activities. We're going to include drill downs to various other components. So we'll be able to take you to code analytics. We'll be able to take you to other analytics. And frankly, we may drive a ton of new analytics that are going to come out of this, because we're going to help, figure this stuff out. And we're going to give you some recommendations about here's a hotspot. Here's where averages here are. Here's where you should be, or whatever. That might be really, really tricky in practice, because again, people can name their value stream any way they want. And maybe they'll have to have some way to map value stream activities. If they add we're waiting for pricing analysis, that might not be a standard phase. We can't give you a recommendation on that, but we can still give you a measurement from, X to Y or whatever. Maybe that's at odds. Maybe recommendations doesn't even work. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you could also have another use case here, right? Reducing code review time, right? You could automate a bunch of stuff there. We could have some code review tools. Maybe the code's being scanned and analyzed before a human even looks at it, and the person that reviews it is now directed to specific things to look at. So it's almost like this drives a whole bunch of other actions for other stages and other teams, which is pretty interesting.
I mean, interesting to throw that out, but if you add a step in your value stream of security audit, maybe we're have you tried, shifting left and putting your security testing in your pipeline?
Yep.
And, whatever, like maybe we can detect some of these things. It could be really, really interesting.
And it's the same for monitoring, actually, because many customers that I spoke with said that they don't think that their cycle time actually finishes with the end of a story or with the end of an issue. Because if you're super fast but you have 300 bugs in what you just shipped, then it doesn't mean that you're actually efficient, because you continue reworking the same code over and over because of bugs. So I think all of this kind of relates to what is actually cycle time. And I think if we get to a stage where customers can actually represent it and we have some sort of an opinion of how we can do that, and obviously this is where all the other stages come in as well, when we can include monitoring and security in 3 years, then I think that's pretty interesting.
So one tangential question, but I think it's actually pretty important. John asked the question about focusing on MR versus issues. What about epics? Like, there's a really good argument for VSM actually should be about epics and not about issues at all, because issues tend to be closed when something ships. But like you just said, there's a bunch of bugs, and like, have I delivered the value? If I've delivered a bunch of bugs, like, is that thing done? Or is it now like, okay, great, we shipped the first MR, the issue is closed, a bunch of bugs come up, but so the epic isn't closed yet. The epic is still there because like until we actually hit some threshold, I don't know. Even when we just get to like feature flags, we already break that a little bit, because again, the issues are probably going to technically be closed when the MR ships, but it hasn't been rolled out. So there's a really good argument for VSM should be about epics.
It also gets into the distinction between project and product, right? Whether or not you're saying an epic equals the product. But if we're talking about the product versus the project, I think this also becomes really, it changes the parameters or the perception of what we're talking about. Because the product is where you're going to see that rework of, we shipped something and we've created a whole host of production incidents or bugs that are in production. Now we have to do all that rework.
I know where you're getting with it, but it's a pet peeve of mine that those words are horrible. It's not a product, it's not a project. Those aren't the differentiations, but I know what you mean. Is the product thinking versus the project thinking? Did we deliver a goal versus did we deliver lines of code?
A project has an end date. Projects end, products go on. If we want to get into the distinction between product and project, not for here, but later.
Right, exactly. Anyway, but the net of it, yes, being like, if I want to deliver value, I want to, like, if that value is all, if the feature is all buggy, well, I haven't delivered the value yet. I got to fix the bugs. And if the feature hasn't been rolled out, well, then that clearly hasn't been delivered. I haven't delivered the value yet. So I think epics are something that's going to be really kind of critical. This is really important because, again, when we get back to the actual implementation of this, I had always envisioned using issue boards as a central part of viewing the value stream as a left to right. But issue boards don't work for epics. So do we need epic boards before this can make sense? Do we start with issue boards and then add epics later? It becomes now a tactical choice that you need to make. But first we need to understand what what's the 3-year look like? Like, do we even need epics? Maybe, in fact, there's some world where epics are the wrong thing. I feel pretty strongly that that's not true. I think that epics are the right thing. Or maybe it's even some other construct on top of epics, but I think issues are not the right construct. But yet issue boards are the right tactical way to deliver value quickly. So I don't know, at some point in there, I think, epic boards or something like that need to sort of happen. But again, getting back to the 1-year plan, like if in 1 year we're just all about issues and its value stream of the issues and it's engineering focused, and maybe we don't cover the fact that yes, it's got bugs, but hey, we delivered the value. Like, the reality is that we will have delivered a ton of value. If we can have great value VSM at the issue level, focused with engineering, like, that's really valuable. But I think it's really important to understand that in the 3 years, that's gonna be a severe limitation.
But if you get down to the granular level of Mark, an issue is the requirement, is the use case, is the thing that then becomes one or many MRs that describes something of value that's going to get delivered to the business at some level. So
Maybe, but that's not always how we use issues, right? Like if you use issues that way, then sure. But if you use issue to reflect, make this change, that issue then is just a change order, which may or may not be tied to actually delivering some value, of which some collection of issues need to be collectively delivered in order for that value to have been delivered. Even like if I think of it as a feature, like yes, I might have an issue that is a feature, but I may have 5 issues that collectively make that feature. That's how we use epics.
Yeah, and we currently have like front end and back end issues for the same main issue.
Right.
So we kind of do that already.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that at least epic in that context. Now the thing is, epics also, they're parent-child epics, and it might be that there's a certain level of epic that we're talking about. Like there could be still 5 levels in the hierarchy, and maybe one of those epics reflects what you're talking about, a product that's a persistent thing. Or at that point, an epic doesn't make sense because it does have an end date usually. But
actually, I'm going to challenge you, Mark. I think it's about parent-child issues, not epics. I mean, I think we're overloading.
Right, but that's what we're
epics.
using it.
I get that. I get that.
We don't have parent-child issues. So
I get that, but I'm saying that for what you're describing, that's exactly what we need. To say it's an epic, I think is overinflating stuff, and we're losing the value of epic. But that's
sure. Anyway, but that is a really great conversation that we just don't have time for today. But I think it's really important to understand that context, because right now we only have these 2 levels of things. And one of the levels happens to have multiple parent-child, so it can be an infinite number of, or maybe not infinite, but 5 levels, whatever it is. But understanding that vision, like maybe we do need to, maybe we actually do need sub-issues instead of sub-epics. And epics are actually a different thing, and we're abusing them now. Maybe, but we need to understand that, I think, a little bit better, and ideally have a vision for how that all works. Then even if you did that and said, okay, we have sub issues, does that now mean that we don't need an epic board? We just still use issues? Or do I still actually want to do VSM at the epic level because that other definition of epic is actually still the thing that I want to track? I don't know.
Yeah, I put a link.
Something you need to figure out.
I put a link in the doc, The Theory of Constraints, which is the goal by Dr. Goldrat. It's a easy read. If you read it, you will find it is the precursor to the Phoenix project. Yep,
cool.
It's a fantastic book.
All right, 1 minute left. Virginia, is there anything you want to get out of this?
No, I think I'm very happy with what we decided, that for 1 year we focus on engineering managers and directors of engineering, and if we can help them basically visualize their process and understand where they're taking a lot of time, and if we can have some sort of drill down, which we've already started with productivity analytics, which is focused on the time to merge MR, then I think we're in a good direction, and I'm happy with that. And I'm sure that as we start releasing, we're going to get a lot more ideas and opinions, and it's probably going to feed into the strategy and plan and change it as well. But I'm kind of happy with where we're going, and the fact that we diminished the scope a lot with not having to get business impact tied to VSM.
Good. So I would love to see then the doc updated with sort of that 3 and 1 year goal, and then see how that impacts what you might work on in your actual plan. I don't know how necessarily, but hopefully we'll have an impact. So maybe just iterate, and then we can have another conversation later if you want to iterate again.
And do we have a template in terms of how we want to do this? Because I guess the documents that we used to work on before were called strategy documents, but I don't think anyone is actually looking at more than 1 year in those pages.
So I don't think we have a template that's of value here. You're going to be the trailblazer here. So so go ahead and just come up with something. I would let's snap to grid and describe a 3-year goal. I was going to say vision, but we're not using that word, but that's ultimately what I really think of, is like paint a picture of what 3 years looks like, paint a picture of what 1 year looks like. And I think you'll that'll be incredibly effective. And then, then we can start talking about actual roadmap and what does the 1 year look like. And so one thing just to throw out is that right now, our category strategy template, we have really done a surface level thing, and the only thing that we've really fleshed out and forced everybody to flesh out is the what's next and why, and so like what's the one next thing we're going to do. But I just gonna be transparent here, but that was not the intent. That was like the absolute minimum that PMs needed to do. But when Jason had done his a while ago, like he had a full 1 year roadmap planned out and in this document form. So I think it'd be totally reasonable if we said our goal is paint a 3 year picture, a 1 year picture, and then an actual 1 year plan. Here's what we're going to deliver. Here's all the features that we are going to deliver over the next year. Here's the milestones of when they're going to happen, or the quarters at least of when they're going to happen. Like that would be a great thing to review.
Okay.
So I don't think the template is bad. I just think like it's open to interpretation, as you mentioned, Mark. So Virginia, what I would say, maybe just add or maybe rename the what's next and break that into 2 sections, a 1 year and a 3 year. And then let's go from there and iterate.
No, let's be clear. What's next is literally it should just be one issue. This is the one thing we're doing next. I'm fine with that. Don't break down what's next.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. That's not what's next is used for right now.
Okay, I'll just change it a little bit so that it makes sense.
So the where are we headed portion is where I think that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Where are we headed? I want to see that be a 3 year where are we headed. Now, maybe if you want to do a 3 year where are we headed and then a 1 year where are we headed, that's fine. I don't know. If you just want to only document the 3 year, then that doesn't really make sense. I think it's actually important to understand what our first 1 year focus is. So, but I want to be really, really clear. When we did this template, the what's next is not, oh, and here's the 3 year, and then what's next is 1 year. No, what's next is the next release, literally the next issue we're going to work on. That's what what's next is. Okay. And let's not abuse that.
Then let's just call it, like, we need to rename these sections to call them what they are. Like,
yeah, it's going to be 3 year plan, 3 year strategy, 1 year plan, next release.
Yep.
Sure.
Cool. Let's not leave it open to interpretation.
Okay, that's fine. That sounds good.
Is that okay with you, Mark?
Yep, sure. Let's do it. 3 year strategy, 1 year plan. And the plan then, I just think is important to paint a picture, like that with the one sentence we've already described. And then an actual plan though, too, like quarter by quarter, here's what we're going to deliver. And the important thing here is like, so eventually, if we took this to executive review, went to e-group, and you're presenting the 1 year plan, like they should be able to read the 3 year picture, like here's where we're going. Okay, good. So the ambition is there. I understand where you're going. Great. Okay, and then 1 year, oh, I can see why you're focusing on this, narrower thing first. And then, okay, in quarter 1, we're going to do this. Quarter 2, we're going to do this. Quarter 3, we're going to do this. Quarter 4, we're going to do this. And then they can see how that all builds out, how that makes a compelling 1 year product, and how it lays the groundwork for the 3 year product. Like that's how I would envision the artifacts to be.
Yep.
Sounds
so,
good.
All right, cool.
Yep. So we're good. Mark, thanks a lot. This was really fun.
Good. Yeah, it was good for me too. And then we came up with some surprising things. So it was valuable from my perspective. It wasn't just me telling you what I think the strategy should be or vice versa. It was the discussion, which is what I wanted.
And Dennis and Adam, I'm glad that y'all were able to join as well. I think it's really important that your perspective was, or that you were here and participating in the doc, and that was really valuable for me. So thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah.
That was very useful.
Everyone.
Thanks for including me.
Thanks.
All right, great. Thanks. Ciao.
Y'all.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.